Okay, so if you're not familiar with them by now, they've become quite popular on certain forums and I could say the more dedicated old school crowd. But there still might be a bit obscure, if you're not familiar with certain things. But yeah, the Microsoft XRGB series they're a series of upscan converters, and they're most famous because they can take pure 15 kilohertz low-res RGB signals and output them as 31 kilohertz RGB, aka VGA, meaning that you can take, something like a Super Graphics, MSX computer, Neo Geo, MVS, whatever, hook it up to anything that'll take a VGA signal, like an old CRT monitor or an LCD TV or whatever, and it does a very, very nice job of upscaling. Really what it does is it just doubles the lines, and that way you get a nice, beautiful, crisp image with basically zero lag, and it's one of the best ways to hook up an old classic video game system to something a bit more modern. I personally can't stand LCDs. I hate them, and I will refuse to use them until the day that every single CRT is dead. But, which is why I have an old computer monitor to mess around with these on. But for most people, though, LCDs are the only choice, and if you don't want your old games to look like crap, you'd want something like an XRGB. So here I've got my 2 and my 2 Plus. These are two fairly well known. I actually made a video on these two before comparing them. The current model is the 3, which mine is actually collecting dust in my closet because, to be honest, I don't really like the 3 so much. It's too complicated for what it is. It's a great unit, but I rarely use it. Maybe one day when I actually do upgrade to an LCD, I'll probably use it, but for the time being, I'm just kind of keeping it for, when I need it. So typically I use the 2 and the 2 Plus. But one thing you never ever hear about, though, is the original model, the XRGB-1. Probably because to most people this is an outdated fossil. This came out in, I forget when, but I think it was the late 90s, possibly 2000. Honestly, I couldn't remember. I'd have to do real research, but this thing is old. And most people, plus, since it is old, not very many of these were actually ever made it out of Japan. Going from memory, I do believe NCSX in New York City did in fact import these back in the day, but back then, everyone just had a CRT TV, and we were pretty much happy with our composite and S video connections. So, back when this was made, the main purpose of this, I think, was just for people that were living in a tiny, like Japanese apartment and didn't even have room to, have multiple displays or whatever, and they're like, now you can use your computer or monitor and your game systems on one. But it was also more targeted towards the Japanese computer crowd, because RGB was something that was never in Japan. TVs and monitors of RGB were mostly restricted to like the MSX, the PC-98, the FM Towns, that kind of stuff. And this model was basically geared for people that had one of those monitors that then wanted to put their consoles into and play them in perfect quality. Well, that's basically what this was really designed for. And while the XRGB-1 is definitely outclassed by the later models, it's still a well-functioning unit. And the best part about the one is that it's cheap. Getting one of these outside of Japan, you don't really see them too much because very few people ever have them. And the people that probably do have them are probably saving them because it is still a well-functioning unit. But in Japan, these sell for virtually nothing. You don't see them all the time, but I found mine in a junk shop somewhere, and I'm not actively using it, but I do really like this unit because I like the simplicity of it. So, if we take a look at the unit itself, It's actually significantly smaller than the 2 Plus. It's, yeah, it's nice and small, but that's because it has a lot fewer stuff on it. See, as you'll notice, here we've got the power button. Input-wise, we've got our Japanese 21-pin RGB connector. We've got S-Video, and we've got composite. That's it. As far as real inputs go. And in fact, you'll notice that there aren't audio inputs for the composite or the S-Video. The RGB, of course, will take audio. But if you want to use this finesse video or composite source, you're going to need to run your sound cables directly to your speakers or whatever. The later models, they added pass-throughs just about for every port, so you could easily just plug it all into one box and then output it, which was a nice feature they added, and this one's kind of lacking. But again, it's the original model. What can you do? See, one of the big differences between the later models is the 2, they added on-screen menus. You bring up your menu, you just click through it with the buttons, and you adjust the settings, and they're kept internally inside. But the one here is completely manual. Everything is done with knobs, dials, and dip switches, the old-fashioned way. Which, it's outdated, but makes it easy to use, and I don't know, I kind of prefer turning knobs to messing around with menus. Especially, one reason I rarely use my XRGB-1 is it's got stupidly long menus. It's a great machine, but I'm a perfectionist, but I'm not at the point where I really need to tinker for 45 minutes whenever I want to change game consoles. But yeah, so as you can see, this thing's all controlled manually. So here we have the audio outs, just standard RCA audio out. But these are basically just a pass-through for the RGB connector. Because, the sound goes in here, it comes out here. There's no other way to use them, that's all they're for. Then we have a series of dials. These are the main way you adjust the video. Here you've got your red, your green, and your blue gains. So you can raise them or lower them and mix the colors however you like. This is brightness. And then next we have the dip switches. Yeah, there's 3 of them. The first one controls the output. You can switch between 15 kilohertz or 31 kilohertz. 15 kilohertz is probably useless for the majority of people that would want something like this, especially in this day. 31 kilohertz is your standard VGA signal. The second dip switch is for switching between RGB input level. It's labeled as NTSC, which is basically for consoles, and on the 2 they call it standard. Well, the PCB setting is, of course, for, like a Super Gun and arcade PCBs. Which, unfortunately, with the 2 Plus, they actually got rid of that. But then again, if you've watched my other videos or know anything about these series, the 2 Plus and the 3 kind of suck for PCBs. The 2 and even the original 1 is the better unit if you want to play arcade boards. And then finally, the third switch just switches the output between PC98 mode and FM Towns mode, as they both use the same connector, but the pinout is slightly different. So if you were using a different type of monitor, you could switch that over. Now you'll see, on the back you'll find 2 15-pin D-subs, which, if you're not familiar with old Japanese electronics, might look a little weird to you. But yeah, they're 15-pin connectors, and these were mainly used by the PC98 and the FM Towns. And so, as you can see, there isn't a standard, VGA connector on here, which is one thing that's a little out of date. But again, the people that would have bought this when this was actually new were people that had those old monitors from their old computers, and this was the easiest way to connect them to it. And then last, there's the power jack. And then on the left here, we have the hue and the color settings. Now these are, as you can see, don't have knobs. They have a screw, and there's a special tool, which I'll show you in a minute, which is used to adjust them. These aren't settings you normally change. Well, what the manual recommends is when you hook it up to your monitor, you use the color and the hue and you adjust them how you like, but then you set them and you leave them there. Then as you switch games, you just use the brightness and the RGB gains to adjust it as you need to. These are something you generally only really need to mess with when you're switching displays. And that's pretty much all the unit has. But it's small, it's lightweight, and it's simple. Just plug in your RGB and VGA comes out. And of course, since it does use the D-sub connectors, it comes with all kinds of, cables. So it comes with a simple male-to-male 15-pin D-sub, which, again, this is probably useless for most people. Though if you do have, like, I don't know, sorry, an X-Neo-1 or an XMD, you actually could use these with that, as opposed to, but these days it's really easy to get an actual 21-pin RGB cable for Mega Drive or Neo Geo, so again, it's nice they included it, but most people wouldn't really need it today. Then we've got the actual adapter cables, D-sub to HD-sub, aka VGA, and there's two of them. There's a male-to-male, and there's also a male-to-female. Basically, see, this one is actually an input, and it's basically a PC pass-through. So, again, a feature that's kind of useless if you're using this on a more modern display. But if you were hooking it up to between your computer, that was fine, because then you could just use the one to plug it into your computer, and then the other adapter to plug in a normal VGA cable. So it comes with everything you need. And then it also comes with RCA stereo to stereo RCA to stereo headphone adapter. So you could plug this in the back and then have a headphone out. So if you were going to use this with like PC speakers, you got that. And then here's also just the little trimming tool thing. It's a very, very tiny plastic screwdriver, which is what you use to adjust the hue and the color. And then, well, there's the power supply, which I'm not even going to take out of the box, and the manual. So, the big drawback of this particular model, the big reason that you never really hear about these, is because they do not have scanline support. With the XRGB-2, they added the ability to create fake scanlines, which are imposed on the picture, and it makes it look a lot more natural, a lot more like if you're playing on a real low-res monitor. The 2 only has one setting. The 2 Plus has 4 settings, and the 3 has like 100 different settings. The XRGB-1 doesn't have this, and it's the main drawback and the main reason that most people don't bother with the 1 anymore. However, one of the main reasons I decided to dig this out is I do not have one yet, but recently a new device was developed called the Scanline Generator, SLG-3000, which you can find a lot of information on certain forums about them. That basically takes VGA in and then imposes scanlines by itself and then VGA out. So what you could do, and they're very affordable, and from what I've seen, they work really, really well. So what you could do if you had one of these, you could easily just, take your output to the scanline generator, and then to your monitor, and then you could have scanlines. So then you can use the XRGB-1 and have scanlines that are arguably better and easier to adjust than what most of the XRGB models can do, and you still have a very nice performing, very compatible unit. Of all the XRGBs, I'm not an expert, but from the stuff I've tested with, in my personal experience, this is the most compatible as far as input goes. This thing has never, ever given me any trouble. Everything I've ever plugged in here, especially with arcade PCBs, every single one I've ever tried has worked beautifully. I've never, ever had a problem. Truth be told, I've never adjusted the color of the hue. You could, but I've never needed to do it. The 2 is generally considered the best with PCBs, and of the models that are easy to get, I do agree with that. The 2 Plus is terrible for PCBs, very low compatibility, and the 3 will run many PCBs, but it still has problems, like my beloved Konami ZX PCB. The 3 won't play it, the 2 Plus won't play it. The 2 will play it perfectly, and the 1 will also play it perfectly. The 1 is, if you really like the old and the more obscure stuff, you can tell the one they tested it with more stuff. Like if you look in the back, they even tested it with the Sega Terra drive, which is that really crappy Mega Drive and computer in one. In the manual, it even lists like all of the PCBs they tested with it, and they actually tested it with ZexX itself. And yeah, it's a very compatible, very easy to use unit. You know, if you get the 3, you're going to need to flash it with firmware, unless you actually want to mess with the Japanese menus, which I don't recommend. The 2 Plus and the 2 have a lot of nice options, but I don't know, I personally find it easier just to turn a knob than to hit the menu button, scroll through to the red gain, and then mess with it. And it's a very solid unit. You know, the knobs are actually pretty tight, and it's a great unit. It's old, it's obscure, you know, it's missing some major features, but if you can actually get one, they're cheap. Again, you don't see them often, but when they do, they sell for virtually nothing. And this was like $300 when it came out, so it's not a cheap piece of technology. And again, the only big drawback is the scanlines, but now that you can get the scanline generator and just add on that, it makes a very powerful combination. And truth be told, once I get a scanline generator, I'm probably going to use the XRGB-1 as my #1 workhorse. I love my 2. My 2 Plus has its uses, and my 3 is waiting in the closet for the day that it's needed. And there's a new model coming out too, which I'll probably get because I'm an idiot. But overall, I really like the 1. It's just simple and easy. You don't have to go online and figure out what half the options do. You don't have to, you know, scan the manual and figure out what the hell some of the settings are. There's a few settings on the 2 and the 2 Plus that I still haven't figured out what they do, and I can read the manual. And even on the 3, there are settings that don't seem to do anything at all. But the 2, what you see is what you get, basically. Simple, straightforward. Sure, you need to use some funky adapter cables, but it's a nice, functioning unit, solid, small. Once you add the scanlines to it, it's a wonderful device. And sure, it's old, but it's great. The one thing, though, I will warn against is that I have never, as you can see, I do not use LCDs. I do not use plasmas. Flat screen, modern technology is just toilet fodder, in my opinion. So, I have never actually tested this on an LCD or any sort of real modern display. All I ever use it on is a standard VGA computer monitor, which is what these were basically designed for. So, like for example, the XRGB-3 has terrible compatibility in its HD modes. Like, from my understanding, very few people have actually gotten the 1080p mode to work on their TVs. So, and even then, it really, you know, the older units especially, they were designed for CRTs. If you want the best performance you can get out of these, CRT is still the way to go. And this, of course, when this came out, was really probably only ever tested on CRTs. That's what it's meant for. So, if you were going to use these on something like a flat screen, an LCD, a plasma, it might work, it might not. That's something that I do not have the capability to test. But if you like to keep it old school and real like I do, this is a solid unit. And if you find one of these for sale somewhere, don't hesitate to pick it up, because it's still a wonderful little device that doesn't get the credit that it deserves. Anyway, that's the XRGB-1. If you've got any specific questions, let me know. And yeah, see you next time.